I'm an artist, but not as you might normally think of an artist. I see life itself as a canvas for art. Every decision we make, every action we take, every person we kiss, every person we hug, every person we help out, they're all brushstrokes on this giant canvas that we're painting. We're all painting, and we're all creating a work of art. And I want to tell you how I came to this philosophy, how it influences my art, and how it affects you. So I started out as a typical skinny white kid from the suburbs. And the question is, how does a kid like this end up doing things like this, going to see places like this? And that's what I'm going to tell you about. One of the first experiences I had that really influenced me was going to live in a foreign land. I got a fellowship stay in Japan for a year, studied traditional arts, and I went there, and I think one of the big important things is having no shame, and that's where I learned to have no shame at all in Japan. That's a huge, huge learning lesson. Then for me, a really important experience that came after that was actually missing a rare opportunity. When I was in Japan, I would travel back to the US through Hong Kong. And one of those trips, I was taking a little boat tour around the Kowloon Harbor, and these guys came up in this long, skinny boat and asked if I could help paddle with them. So I climbed over to their boat, paddled with them for a couple hours, and at the end, they said, "Hey, could you paddle with us tomorrow? Tomorrow's a Dragon Boat Festival, and we're missing a person. We need somebody extra." I didn't really know what the Hong Kong Dragon Boat Festival was, and my flight left the next morning, and I didn't think I could reschedule it, so I said no. And then later, I realized what I had done, and I regret to this day that opportunity will never come back again to race with a Chinese team in the Hong Kong Dragon Boat Festival. What was I thinking? Missed a rare opportunity. The next thing that really influenced me was I returned to the US, and I was putting myself through school at a pizza shop when our shop was robbed. And one of the robbers put a gun to my head, pulled the safety back, and told me he was going to blow my brains out if I didn't open the safe that I didn't know how to open. Obviously, I'm here. I lived through that. But it got me to think about the fact that life can end very suddenly and randomly. And if that's the case, I want to at least do the things that I think are important. So that was a really influential experience for me. And then I finished college, and honestly, I wanted to be an artist, but I really didn't have a vision of where I was going to go with my art, and that didn't feel good to me. And so I changed my plans. Even though I had this dream of being an artist, I switched into sciences, and I worked in the rainforest, and I got to do a lot of exploring, which was wonderful. And I also used that opportunity. I had to do some art. I used that opportunity to teach myself photography. And that was a great opportunity. It was a really wonderful thing to do that. Then after I finished my PhD, I was working at the university, and I started up a really large and kind of crazy project to photograph these national forest lands called Roadless Areas. And it was sort of crazy because there's 60 million acres of these, and it was pretty much me with one camera. You know, who would do something like that? It's crazy, right? So I spent a lot of summers wandering around these wilderness areas that most people don't go to and photographing them. And eventually I recruited a couple of other photographers, and I managed to put together an exhibit that was shown in the rotunda of the Senate building in the US Senate building in Washington, DC. So that project had a good outcome. It was big, it was crazy, but it really had a good outcome. But even after that, I suddenly found myself in this place of personal crisis. I was going through a personal crisis with a divorce, and then also I had felt like I was a failure. I felt like I had left my dream of becoming an artist. I'd switched careers, and then I didn't feel like I was a success in my career as a scientist. But you know, when you look at the definition of failure, it has nothing to do with what you've achieved. It has everything to do with what your intention was and whether or not you've made your intention. And so I found myself a visiting artist position, and I started making a lot of art. I went back to my roots. I made these ceramic pieces, these ceramic torsos, and I started projecting photographs on them. And I put them in these dilapidated old buildings. And while I was doing that, I realized that this is actually something about me. I was looking at my life as a piece of art. And that's when this idea came to me, that life itself actually is a canvas for art. And all these decisions I'd made, they were actually brushstrokes on that canvas. And when I realized that, I realized that those mistakes that I thought that I'd made, those changes in career paths, they weren't mistakes, they weren't failures, they were just brushstrokes. They're part of this big piece of art. And so I decided to take that on as a true philosophy for my art. And the next project I did, I incorporated that specifically, that I was going to travel to conflict zones, and I wanted to bring people together from opposite sides of conflicts, and I called this project Enemies. And for me, it was about trying to understand how people came back from truly horribly dark places into the light. And so I went to Africa, and I went to Kashmir. I traveled around the world, and really, one of the important things that came out of that were these massive brushstrokes that I got from meeting people and hearing their stories. It was monumental. It changed my life entirely. So, what am I trying to tell you? Am I trying to tell you that you need to do these things? No, that's not what I'm trying to tell you. My life is a little bit like a Jackson Pollock painting. You probably don't want a life like that. But everybody can look at their life this way. And if you paint a brushstroke on the canvas that maybe is the wrong color, or you put it in the wrong place, it doesn't mean anything, because you don't know that brushstroke could be the most important part of your painting years down the line. And you can't predict that until you keep painting around it. Maybe somebody else paints a brushstroke on your life, but you're not going to know how important that was, or even if it was positive or negative until years later. And so, finally, I want to talk about the big elephant in the room about going against the grain, fear. That's the scary thing about doing something that people don't want you to do, or that you think people don't want you to do. And when I was asked to give this talk, I thought, well, what can I do to go against the grain in a TED talk? Okay, because TED Talks, like everybody who gets up here has done something really interesting. They're all people who go against the grain. And for me, I thought, okay, I need to address a fear of mine. And this is part of what I'm going to show you is a piece of work that I put together just for this conference. And it's a type of work that I've never done in front of anybody at all. So you guys are guinea pigs, and I'm doing something that scares me. I've been trying to get myself to create this type of work for over a year now, and this was a good opportunity for it.